So I want to first acknowledge as we start talking about our homelessness plan. Thank you all for being here on such a critical issue. I want to acknowledge Frank Chop is here, and he's been doing this kind of work for decades. I won't age him by saying decades and decades. I'll just say decades. Where are you, Frank? Thank you for being here. We also want to recognize Councilmember Dan Strauss for letting us once again in his district. I'll better introduce Council members Andrew Lewis as well. Are those the only electeds I have here that I want to make sure? Anyone running for office I need to know about? No? Okay, we're all safe there. So today, again, I want to thank you for joining us as we sort of look at the part of our ecosystem of addressing the issue of homelessness. I hope that the way we set the format up this afternoon, where you got a chance to actually see the technology that we're using to track the data, was of some use. And I'm sure you may have some questions. I'd be more than happy to address the questions. I may turn to some expertise on some of the technical aspects of what we're trying to do. But as we promised, we hope that we're opening up the data for not only for you to see as members of the press, but for the entire city to see. And this is important as we address the need of the hour, which is homelessness and housing people who so desperately need it. Now, despite real dedication and work from the city staff, from the ecosystem of housing developers and those providing services to those in need, we still believe that our city's existing response to homelessness wasn't where we wanted to be when I took office in January. Quite candidly, our observation, and it was my personal experience having served 12 years on the city council, that our departments continue to work in silos. There were different methods of data collection. And in my mind, there was an unclear vision on how we were going to attack this problem. Many people, of course, well-intended, but without what I would suggest is a cohesive strategic approach. A database approach is what we're trying to do under the Harrell administration. I do want to thank the city staff who've been doing this work, many of whom have been working in this space for, again, decades or years. And so we want to thank them. But we know that only real progress could be made by examining the data. Even if we run the risk of looking at the soft underbelly of a city, we have to look at the data such that we could track our progress. So today you can see the data and view our plan at homelessness.seattle.gov, which is unprecedented. And I'll share some highlights and some themes as I go on. And I have to tell you that I thought it was going to be a little warmer today, so I apologize for the weather. It looks good, but it looks better than it is. So I have the great fortune of being the first mayor to ever work with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. We recognized early as policy leaders and as people in this space that the needs of the people who are homeless do not stop at the borders. A few weeks ago, when we talked about our approach at Woodland Park, just a few blocks from here, you saw in a real life basis our approach is always to lead with compassion, to make sure that we do our case management work first. We get to know the people experiencing homelessness by name. I've heard people describe our approach as leading with sweeps, and nothing could be further from the truth. We lead with compassion, and I think that we've made it clear in our actions. But we will continue to fund about 70% of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority's budget, around the tune of $118 million. We'll continue to do that. But it should be very clear that we've given the majority of our homelessness budget to this organization so that they can develop and communicate and execute a regional approach. What this actually means is that the issues of diversion, shelter, rapid rehousing, transitional housing services, permanent supporting housing services, and the deployment of outreach service providers reside in that organization. So I look forward to continuing our work with the CEO, Mark Dones, and their staff, and especially as we move into year 2 and develop new budgets. And I think many of you know their budget requests that they've made thus far. But I do want to thank our partners at the county and the suburban cities, the Sound Cities Association, for the work that they're doing. And the Councilmember Lewis's and Herbo's leadership, just last week we passed a resolution which might have been not as loud as some resolutions are, but it was incredibly important. And that resolution that I supported and articulated a regional vision made it very clear that as different cities pass the ordinance of their city, some of whom are not as empathetic as ours, that they realize that we need their resources too. We need their skin in the game, because our skin is in the game. And so we passed a resolution. Again, I want to thank Councilmember Lewis and Herbold for putting it forth from the city council, from their city council positions, and we got it passed. I believe it was a unanimous decision where the other regional players will realize they have to put resources in play as well. And I want to thank our county partners for supporting that as well. At the end of the day, we have to bring people indoors. We know that affordable housing is both a symptom and a solution to the homelessness crisis, and for long-term progress, we must create more housing more quickly. Easier said than done, and that's why under my administration, you'll see that we've committed to having our affordable housing project permits approved within 12 months of submission to help ensure development matches are done. This is not an expedited method by which we sacrifice quality or community input, but it's a means by which we look at our own ecosystem, our own infrastructure, our own regulatory processes and say, we can do better, we will measure it, and we'll put that on the dashboard for everyone to see. That's why we're following the same model as the unified care team that we established. In those lines, we established a newly created housing sub-cabinet. What we did is we looked at everyone in our department that touches housing. The Office of Housing, the Planning and Community Development Organization, Design and Construction, Seattle Public Utilities, City Light, SDOT, Seattle Fire Department, and I want to thank our Chief Scoggins for being here as well. That everyone that has something to do with people who are affected by our housing crisis are at the table in our housing sub-cabinet, and we get things done. We talk to each other. On our One Seattle approach, we're not fighting for turf. We're not working in silos. We realize that we are part of one city government. And quite candidly, as an employee for the city of Seattle, this is refreshing because everyone realizes we're heading down the same path. We also realize that our housing policies are linked to our public safety approach. And I'm sure many of you may have questions about this, so let's argue or examine or evaluate with data. The link between homelessness and public safety is nuanced. The statistics as we present them on the dashboard show that there are serious safety issues at encampments and for the people living in them. From January through April, there were 3,707 emergency response calls to encampments. That's 31 per day. There were 608 fires in encampments. That's approximately 5 per day. And there were over 50 shots fired or shootings that had either a victim or offender who's experiencing homelessness. We can't hide from this reality. This only reinforces our commitment to act and develop new solutions that better meet the needs of those in crisis and on the ground. That's what we're doing through Health One, through the 911 innovations we're making, our community services officers, and the development of the third department that you heard us talk about before. So what you're seeing in our plan is a very comprehensive approach, but we're not afraid to look at the data. This does not mean we are criminalizing poverty. This does not mean we're not compassionate or empathetic. It means that we're opening up the data for everyone to see, so you can see what I see. You can see what residents and homeowners and renters see. You can see what employers and employees see. And then you can see our work toward that end. The last sort of conceptual description I'd like to make to you is what you saw in our One Seattle Day of Service approach. All hands on deck. Seattle communities, businesses, and philanthropic organizations, we are working with them to seek opportunities to do their part. We're working to establish an innovative public-private partnership to raise money for social services in our city and region. You saw us do it with the Ukraine concert. You saw us do it with the One Seattle approach. We are having discussions with members in those organizations, and we'll have that done ideally by the end of this summer. We'll have a contract in place with certain measurements. You're giving me a body language. You're throwing my rhythm off there. Oh, I missed something. So I missed something. I missed something. Let me see what I missed.
Immediate units now, 2,000 units.
Oh, I skipped a whole page. I'll come back to that. I hope there's something refreshing about my transparency. I've been told that before, but it's not intentional. Sometimes I just go a little fast and get a little excited. In any way, before I backtrack, that this organization is going to be critical to our success because, again, we know that we are per capita one of the richest cities in the country, and that we do have affluence around us. We have people living in cars and sleeping in tents, and so when we showed in One Day of Services that we had thousands and thousands of people and organization employers that will come together to help. So we're working on that strategy, which is indeed going to be a very fruitful strategy, because I believe at the end of the day, we have an empathetic and a compassionate city. Now let me go back to building affordable housing faster. A whole page. Here we go. While housing is the long-term solution, we obviously need more places for people to go in to live their lives and seek the treatment that they have. So for the first time in the city's history, this dashboard that we've created allows the public to follow expansion of accessible shelter and supportive housing development from the initial planning phase to their eventual opening. That's why my administration has pledged to identify 2,000 units by the end of the year. And so far, we've identified 1,300 expected to open this year. It's why we're standing right here, and I'm excited to announce the acquisition of the Dockside Apartment building, awarding Lehigh and under Sharon Lee's leadership, $18.9 million to open this space. This will allow 70 permanent homes for people experiencing homelessness starting July 1st, and an additional 22 homes for individuals earning up to 50% of the area median income, which we know is about $45,300. More permanent housing opens up more spaces in our shelter areas, and it creates the stability needed for people to get well and recover. Now, I've said repeatedly, we don't start taking victory laps. We can take a few victory steps, because this is a victory step. And I want to thank you for your decades of service, Ms. Lee, in this area. And we're excited. And these partnerships that we're developing are going to pay off for everybody. Again, we lead with measurement, we lead with compassion, we bring in the right expertise, and we get things done. So in conclusion, before I introduce Councilmember Lewis, I believe, I want to thank Councilmember Lewis, who is the chair for the Public Safety, Public Assets, and Homelessness Committee. I want to thank these fine folks standing with us, because when we took office in January, I said that we had to build internal systems first. We had to do a sort of introspective analysis of the hand that we're dealt. We're far from finished. We're just getting started. We promised this kind of dashboard, this plan. One of the things I observed when I was out of office was that I said, where is the plan? What is the strategic approach? I saw moments of brilliance and moments of activity, but I didn't see a strategic data-based approach. And so that's what we think is needed to be as effectively, to work as effectively as we can. So having said that, I'm going to introduce Councilmember Lewis, and thank you for being here and share a few words from the City Council. Councilmember Lewis.
Right. Mayor Harrell, thank you so much for those introductory remarks, and thank you so much for finally bringing all the silos of city government together that intersect with the crisis of homelessness so we can finally have the comprehensive plan that is necessary to move forward on this issue. When I came into office in January of 2020, there frankly was no plan on how to address chronic homelessness going forward. The regional authority was in its embryonic early stages. There was conflict between the Seattle City Council and the mayor. And I am so pleased to stand behind the public here today and to stand behind our partners working in this area to say that that's the past. You have a city council and a mayor that are united behind a data-based plan to start working on and approaching this crisis in a regional way in cooperation with an authority that is fully staffed and ready to go to help us implement that plan. And when I look out here, it's not just going to be us as elected officials. You know, I look and see folks like Barb over here, who has built thousands of tiny homes that are keeping people warm, safe, thriving in our community right now. Sharon, who through her leadership has found great opportunities like this building we're standing in front of. There's a reason that we're launching this database today, standing in front of the thing that is going to finally solve this crisis. Supportive, permanent housing, 4 walls, a door that locks, inside plumbing, the things we all take for granted. We now have the data, the information that's going to be in a database accessible to the public. When I'm working with constituents, I can finally be able to show them an authoritative place where they can go and see what their taxpayer dollars are doing, what their city leaders are doing to make progress on this issue that is omnipresent in all of our lives. You know, I look out and see a landscape over the last 5 months where we have been able to bring to fruition hundreds of additional units and get them online, that we've been able to move and get hundreds of our neighbors experiencing homelessness and encampments in RVs into permanent housing, and short of permanent housing into things like tiny house villages and master leased hotels, because we are moving with the urgency that the crisis demands. And that is what the lesson of this year has been so far under Mayor Harrell's leadership. I do just want to lift up, you know, because I want to get to the team that can walk through the database. I really want to attest, and I know I speak for Councilmember Strauss too, and I'm sure he will say similar comments, the leadership of Deputy Mayor Washington in bringing all of this together. And over the last 5 months, the work that so many city employees have done to aggregate this data, to make siloed systems talk to each other instead of talk at each other, that's the work that Tiffany and her team has done, and I am so happy to be here to join in the unveiling of that work. Tiffany, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to work with you on these issues. So, you know, I'm going to hand it back over. I don't know, Mayor, who I'm handing it over to next. Back to you. Very good. But really appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon and appreciate the opportunity to share this data with the public. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Lewis. I want to recognize before I introduce our next speaker, Barbara Oliver, who I had a chance to meet. Boy, it seemed like a long time ago. It was about a year ago. I wasn't in a suit, where they actually build tiny homes, and she's doing such great work, and I wanted to, and she's rocking that One Seattle shirt, by the way. Thank you for all the work you continue to do, Barbara. I'm going to introduce Sharon Lee, the Executive Director of Lehigh, to talk more about the Dockside Apartments. Under her leadership, Lehigh has developed more than 4,500 units of affordable housing in Washington State, including transitional permanent housing first options. She's a frequent speaker and panelist on housing justice, housing preservation, and ending homelessness. She holds a Master of Architect and a Master of City Planning from MIT and a BA with honors from the University of Pennsylvania. I always sort of like saying that when I introduce you because that's pretty darn impressive. But I present to you, who many of you know has been working in this space, Sharon Lee. Thank you, Sharon, for saying a few words.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your leadership and partnership. We have been so pleased to have you work with us on buying this wonderful building that will be permanent supportive housing. And first I want to introduce well, as you will see here, there's also Spud Fish and Chips. And I want to introduce the owners. We have Pam Cordova and Craig Smith. And they are returning to this location, and they're going to be our long-term neighbor. So we very much appreciate your support. And interestingly enough, we do not have the certificate of occupancy yet for the building, so do not take the elevator yet. There's an interesting story. We're almost complete construction, but if you go to around the corner, there is a mural. One reason why the certificate of occupancy was held up was because the mural was promised to the community, and the developers could not find 3 days of no rain. So now we're very close to getting the certificate of occupancy. I wanted to make sure that everyone here and the press will tour. There's 2 live-work units on the side, and those will be for people who are basically making minimum wage. We have 22 units that will be affordable to the low-wage workers. And we then will also have 70 units that will be considered permanent supportive housing. We will have a on-site live-in manager. We'll have case managers. We'll have, of course, janitorial, office staff. And I want to introduce Michael Eng. He is in charge of the lease up here. And we hope to purchase the building really soon and then occupy and provide furniture and fixtures. I wanted to say that the city Office of Housing with Michael Winkler-Chen has provided financing, and the financing is critical to leverage state money. Representative Frank Chop and Senator Dave Frock were key to making sure that there was a historic high level of funding for a rapid acquisition for permanent supportive housing. So this is an opportunity for the state as well as the city and the community to get together to make sure there's sufficient permanent housing. And the reason why Barb Oliver is so important is that she has been building tiny houses for us. So what's the relationship? We have hundreds of people living in tiny houses waiting for permanent housing to open up. And we need both. We can't just continue to debate, oh, should we not have any shelter? Should we not have any tiny houses? When we can, and we know we can build more housing like this. And we have many nonprofits who are supporting this effort, but we need both in our system. Otherwise, it's very hard to make sure that people living on right-of-ways, people living in parks, people living on the streets, how can they have no place to go. So we must have both tiny houses and shelters as well as sufficient numbers of permanent housing. And we hope that you will definitely take a look, tour, and we're going to be opening very soon. And we plan on hosting a open house for the community and have people take a look at this wonderful new building. So thank you, Mayor, again for your wonderful support, and we hope to have you tour the building as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon Lee. Before I take questions, I just want to make sure I wasn't missing a whole page of comments I was supposed to make. We're okay there, so I'll entertain a few questions, please. Yes.
You talk a lot about finding places for people to live and creating new homes. But what about the mental health and the addiction side of things? I mean, a lot of times homeless people, it's not a function of being down on your luck, but being alcohol, drug addicted, or mentally ill. What about those services?
Yeah. So that's part of what we're funding through RHA. That's part of the description of services, and you hit the nail on the head, that we realize even for those that refuse housing options that they may not be in the right state of mind, or they may have addiction problems. So we understand that's part of our approach. We're also looking at, through education and through our outreach, what are the indicators of people in their lives as to when we might be able to see them depart from norms and have some of the behavioral issues we are concerned with. So not only will we make sure they have the treatment that's so needed, but how can we go upstream and help them with services? Now, I've described it in other forums. My approach is always sort of threefold. Number one is to do the upstream work, to see where people could possibly get helped earlier upstream. That's will pay dividends 5, 10, 15 years from now. Had someone had these very meaningful conversations 10 or 15 years from now, we think that we would have had some relief. That's the first pillar. The second one is what you see that we have to do every day. That's crisis response. And a lot of people get hung up on the crisis response because that's what it is. And the third one is what we're talking about today, moreover, is the long-term housing solutions. We want people warm, and we want them clean, and we want them to get back on track. So those are the three pillars with which our dashboard is premised upon, but you hit the nail on the head that we have to get them treatment and our funding strategies through the RHA, and we look forward to seeing results from that strategy.
Mayor, how much community input is taken before you acquire a property like this?
I'm sorry, Jamie, can you come and help me field some of the questions? Because I see like...
Yeah, that might be a better question for Sharon to talk about, the good neighbor agreement and pieces like that.
So can you come and help your brother out here? Yeah. So can you repeat the question,
yeah,
please?
Sure thing. Hey, Sharon. So wondering how much community input was taken before you go forward and acquire a property like this?
Yes, well, what we did was we sent out a Dear Neighbor letter to everybody living within 500 feet of the building. And then we called up the Green Lake Community Council. We talked to elected officials, and we also talked to neighbors. So we talked to Retreat and the immediate merchants in the neighborhood. Yes, and then we are going to have an open house as well. And the letter basically says that lays out what I just described in terms of the housing and a number to call if they would like more information. And we are willing to, we talked to Hearthstone and other places around here.
Your plan relies heavily on the Regional Homelessness Authority. You've had some frustrations with the other cities not pitching in. Will you ask the Regional Homelessness Authority to give Seattle preferential treatment because you're putting so much money into it, because your whole plan relies on this pipeline of housing to get people off the street and into housing, and the Homelessness Authority provides that housing? Will you ask for a preferential treatment?
Well, that's not usually a term I'm used to saying, preferential treatment, but I'll ask for anything I can get to get the resources at the table. So you could phrase it any way you like, but I will tell you that I monitor the ordinances and the resolutions from our neighboring cities to see what their policies are. And some of them are, as I said earlier, is not as empathetic as we've shown here. But as we continue to have more people come to Seattle, we need their resources. We need their, let me be more specific, we need their dollars, okay? We also can use some of their real estate and some of their land and some of their treatment providers. So I'm just looking for a stronger partnership. And here's the good news. Here's the good news. I'm convinced we have it. That I've developed relationships with these mayors and these city council members. They just didn't happen overnight. I spent time on the phones and visiting them through virtual conference calls. And I think they understand that. And I think their heart is here.
I just want to follow up. The governor is making a plan that if you provide money to the cities, people living on highway right-of-ways get preferential treatment for housing. I'm asking you if you're going to do the same, since you're applying 70% of the budget for the RHA.
Yeah. I haven't made that decision yet. I have not made that decision. I haven't had that discussion with, and that kind of discussion, I talked to my colleagues on the council, I talked to my cabinet member, but I haven't made that decision maker. Erica Barnett. Sarah. Erica.
Just a question about the resolution the other day that you guys passed. Are you confident that Councilmember Lewis mentioned that it's an unrealistic budget ask from the regional authority? Are you confident that they're going to stop sending down unrealistic asks in the future, just from that resolution?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think because of time, they approach the budgeting process as, in a perfect world, this is what I could do, this is what I want, and I don't think they've articulated a clear expectation that they were even going to get it. And my comments to them were, okay, we accept that right now, but at some point I need you to do the hard work, which is tell us exactly what you need. This is not a negotiation, you go high, I go low, because I want to be as supportive as possible. So they gave us a high number. There was a wish list in there. They fully understand we're going to examine that number, and then we reserve to put another hat on. The hat now goes on to looking at the city's revenues and our limitations, and then we'll come out making decisions. So it's a malleable kind of process, one of which I don't want to have years from now, because in particular their staffing model causes me concerns. They're going pretty quickly, and I'm having conversations with Deputy Mayor Washington on the logic behind their staffing models, because I don't quite follow it yet. So I hope I answered your question, but again, we're going to evaluate their proposal, and I think that again, the resolution passed was a good start to let others know we need their money. Sarah?
Deputy Mayor said that the dashboard that you released this morning, when it shows tents and it shows RVs, is a reactive count because it's people bringing things up, not a proactive count, as in the city has gone out and tried to actually assess how many tents and RVs there are. Can you explain if there is a plan to do so and when that would take place?
So I may have to, yeah, can you go? I may have Deputy Mayor Washington respond to that.
So as Jamie said, we're looking into that now. The reason it was a reactive plan at first is because there was a backlog of, what was the backlog, Stephen? In the database, the backlog? Over 1,100, I think. There was a huge backlog on day one. We'll get you the specific 6,000 people who had already called in and said, can you come look at this encampment or RV? We had to do those first, and that took a long time. And so we're in current conversations now about if and how we would do a proactive approach.
Sure.
A lot of the housing units identified seem to have started under the previous administration. Can you expound on what qualified as identifying a new unit?
Sure. Well, number one, nothing was really identified because there was no plan. Let me just be clear that, of course, the city of Seattle for decades have been into funding housing and identifying units. But unless there's an articulable, measurable, outcome-based plan, it was what we would consider an ineffective strategy. So we didn't start looking at what was in units. We said we're going to start January 1st, where we started, identify all the units, measure them, and quite candidly, we will reevaluate the data. So this is not easy work. And at some point, I'm hoping that you realize, while we're in crisis control, the second of the three pillars I described, I'm building systems here with my help. So whether how many units were in progress or not, quite frankly, I can't even concern myself with that. Because unless it's part of a plan, we're going to be having this conversation 10 years from now. And we're not going to have this conversation 10 years from now. So I didn't spend a lot of time to try to figure out what their existing plans were, because quite candidly, they were non-existent. And certainly not in a matter where you saw today, where you could actually scroll over in a map and see what we're dealing with. Our customer response system, our CRM system, our customer relation management system, bar none, is, we looked at the private sector on how people deal with their customers to say, how can We look at our residents as people who deserve to be served, and how can we serve them? So these systems that we developed, while you just had a 30-minute crash course on how it works, took a lot of hours to develop, and we will continue to improve it. So I don't speak a lot about what was here before, because in our mind, and in my mind as the mayor, it was not part of a cohesive strategic database plan.
Mayor, you mentioned the 1,300 units that you've identified. That's one thing between now and the end of the year. Some of those are under construction, but what does that mean today? How many of those 762 tents and X amount of RVs are going to have the possibility to move indoors, the people that live there?
So I believe our dashboard responds to that by talking about how many units are there today, how many are there going to be online, and what our goal is. That's all part of a plan. If you, Deputy Mayor, could say a little more.
So it does say it. I don't have it on the top of my head, but you can go look at it. And so when you take the time to build a database and you know how many are pending or under construction, that then allows you to connect those pending and under construction with locations that people are living unsheltered. So as Sharon Lee pointed out, she can move people from tiny home villages into this building, which opens up units where people prefer closed doors. Then we will say, okay, Sharon Lee, there's 70, we're just using an example, 70 tiny home villages. We'll say to Mark and their outreach team, okay, let's go bring in 70 people. And so to me, the identification of the number of beds open and pending are huge, because it allows you to plan forward to bring people in.
And let me say this in response to the question. I'm sure this part will end up on the director's floor in the cutting room process, but I'm going to say it anyway. That we are today to talk about the homelessness plan. But as you see, by virtue of this project, we're also concerned about the struggling teacher, the barista, the nurse, or the retired veteran that can't afford to live in the city. So as we continue to talk about the housing crisis, it's embedded in our work that we're looking at all aspects of the whole continuum of housing. That's why this project is in particular. And Michael Winkler-Chin here, who has experience in this area, is with our cabinet looking at what that long-term vision looks like. She's only been on the job for a couple of months. But it's important that I have people in our cabinet that understand that on one day it's a person struggling to live in a tent, and on the next day it's a person's housing insecure, such as a nurse or a healthcare worker. So this is the start of looking at the whole continuum of housing, and again, we're opening it on a real-time basis. That's why the permit process becomes so critical in the work we're trying to do. I saw a question over here.
Chris.
Yes, Chris. Chris Daniels. Chris. Always a joke with Chris Daniels. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay, so
throw me a lob.
I'm going after your dashboard here. 225 RVs listed, and the city is spending $9.8 million this year to remove the RVs. So if those RVs are still there, how are you spending the money?
So I wasn't following your math because I was looking at my. So how are we spending money? Say that again, Chris.
There's 225 RVs listed according to your database.
Okay.
The city is spending $9.8 million to remove them, but they're still there. So how are you spending the money?
Yeah, that's your math is. Go ahead.
And the hope is we're not removing RVs. Remember, we were at a shelter in place. What the mayor announced a few weeks ago was we are going to ask people to begin to adhere to the 72-hour parking policy. We're not going to move all of those RVs.
So I want to be clear on your facts, Chris. That $9.8 million is not.
That's the total for RV removals and camper removals.
So that's a total amount. That's just not for the RVs.
So along those lines, though, still in Georgetown, there's RVs right in front of people's homes and apartments, and there was a woman who said that she had a break-in with a man from one of those RVs coming into her apartment. What do you say to them about those RVs that are sitting outside their homes right now?
So the first issue is this. We've identified, so people can see what I'm looking at, as I said earlier. The RV situation is sort of an unfortunate situation that's developed in recent years, and in my mind is completely intolerable. It's intolerable for those being forced to live in an RV, and it's for those who live in the areas where it's affected their quality of life. So again, working with SPU, and we have our SPU director here, Andrew Lee, we spend as much time as possible on case management, talking to them, understanding what their issues are. But we're also not afraid to do what's necessary to make sure that if they're not complying with the law, that again, we have to enforce the law. So it is a clear problem. We are doing the remedial work that we can. We have a criteria by which we'll measure the areas we'll clean up, and quite candidly, we're working hard in this area, probably harder than you've seen in recent years, but I fully acknowledge it's a serious problem.
The Regional Homeless Authority wants 6 or 7 more RV lots. Would you welcome those in the city of Seattle, knowing they haven't worked in the past?
Well, again, I'm not, I'm on the governing board for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. I'm not gonna state a preference, but we do know that is a proven best practices on how to deal with RVs. Has been used in other cities and other counties. I'm not sure that it has all reside within Seattle. I have discussions with my suburban cities outside, and we'll make some decisions collectively. Again, you all have been around the city like I have. This is not a good thing that's come about our city, and I fully acknowledge that as mayor. I'm going to say this. You know, I said when I took this job, I don't make excuses. So the fact is, they are there. We need to address it. We have the systems in place to measure it, to address it. We have the right policies in place, and the work will get done.
Many residents have been anxious for your plan. I mean, you mentioned the shots fired, and you talked about the emergencies and the fires. So for the residents who are out there in those various communities who are wondering about, what about the encampment in my backyard? What about safety? Shots fired, this is concerning. What would you say to them?
I'll say this. Number one is, this plan is a great start for opening up the data. Many of you know I have a background in technology and a background in strategic thinking. So the first thing I needed to do was quantify the issue. We're also developing what's called a public safety plan, which is different. That certainly we have a police department, we have officers, we have rank and file, et cetera. We have strategies, we have laws in place. But what I want is a true public safety plan, because there's a correlation, as I described, between homelessness and public safety that I have to address looking at the data. So you're going to see, I don't want to commit a certain date because you guys always hold me to that date, but I hope to have it within weeks, not months, this public safety plan that I've actually drafted. I want to commend Director Tim Burgess here, that's in the back working closely with me on it, and Senior Deputy Mayor Monisha Harrell and Andrew Meyerberg. We're working on a public safety plan which we think will give the residents and the employers and employees in this city a sense of assurance that we don't just react, we strategically plan. But I'll be the first to say, when you're in crisis response, as we have been, it takes a while. And so I tell folks that as I address problems that have been decades in the making, been on this job for 5 months, when I'm addressing problems that take decades in the making, work with us. That's what One Seattle is about. I don't have anyone to blame in the city. The buck stops with me. So we assure those voters that we are strategically working with strategy, with data. We're open and transparent, and we'll get the work done. Whoa!
I haven't even gotten one yet. Let me just ask this quick question. Just practically speaking, I've spoken to many neighbors over the past few weeks. One of their greatest concerns is once a clearing happens on a public sidewalk or on the street, the RV or the tent comes back. What are you going to do if the campers come back? And ultimately, will there be a hotline or an email to report that if they do for the neighbors? And also, a lot of neighbors have been complaining and criticizing the city council. Can the city council be a representative body to go to if they have concerns as well? Tell me how all of that is going to work if neighbors have complaints about tents and RVs coming back.
So thank you, Jonathan. I'll respond. Let's see. So my first response to what we call re-encampments, that we acknowledge that that can occur and sometimes does occur. But we've again built a system by which people could let us know when it occurs, and we'll take actions. That is, it's fruitless if all of a sudden we are trying to get people housed and another set of unhoused people come in a certain area. We're going to treat them. We're going to try to find them housing, but we do understand that that does occur. And again, we set up a system by which we could hear from people to address it, and we will address it. The second piece that was, the city council.
I mean,
Yeah, let's blame the city council. No, no, we don't do that.
Is there going to be a hotline? What is this number they can call if the tents reemerge? That part was unclear, sir.
So,
I gave it to you. So go to the Find It Fix It app and then put in the title repopulated site, and then my team gets an email every day that has all the sites that have repopulated listed, and they will try to address it within 48 hours.
And the council piece? I mean,
the council piece, I'm going to say this. You've seen Councilmember Dan Strauss and I come out to his district, and we're trying to get a lot of work done collaboratively. I believe in his vision and what he's trying to do, and I believe in his ability. You see Councilmember Lewis doing the exact same thing as the public access and homelessness person on the council. We talk frequently. We're working together. That's what it's going to take. So I don't blame anyone for what we're trying to do. I blame the conditions that have caused people to live unhoused. That's what I blame. But we're in this together. One Seattle. We're going to do this together. Thank you very much.
Mayor. One more question that's not related necessarily to
Should I come off record?
You can stay right there and answer
Okay.
everybody. You were just talking about your public safety plan. There were a lot of shootings over the weekend. What does that say about what the police department need to do? Do you take a different strategy based on all the horrible shootings that we saw in your city over the weekend?
Well, not only have we seen this in our city, but we've seen what's happening in our country. And I don't know if we need another shooting for us to, once again, talk about the policies that need to change. So in our public safety strategy, we're going to talk about, even given the limitations that a city has under RCW 9.41.290, the limitations that we have, there's still some things we can do. So I'm working with Director Burgess and my public safety team in our public safety strategy to talk about what we can do. How can we work with our schools, for example? How can we look at the data on every case that we have where there's a shooting? We're looking at, on a granular basis, what we can do. And again, you've heard me say this before, that one of the things I want to accomplish during my first term is relief from that state exemption, where I can't do something as simple as prohibiting guns on open spaces like a park. I'm prohibited from doing that. I'm prohibiting from taking the firearm away from someone who's intoxicated. I think the city should be able to do that. We could take away someone's driver's license if they're intoxicated. Reasonable policies like that. So we're working that into our public safety plan. And again, my hearts go out for all those who have lost lives recently and all those victims. I do also want to say that we saw some courageous work from our police department in the last day or two on shootings. And so I, again, want to recognize we continue to have a demoralized police department, and I'm making sure that through our recruiting plans and through my personal work with them, we continue to build up a police department. I'm convinced that we will have one of the most effective police departments in this country by the time we finish our work here. Thank you.